Welcome to FreeCell Lab. This is the channel where we dissect history's most gripping social experiments. Today, we're going back to the absolute beginning, St. Petersburg, Russia. The year is 1897, and yes, it's freezing. Meet Ivan Pavlov. Ivan wasn't even a psychologist, and he would have hated being called one. In fact, he openly mocked the psychologists of his day. While they sat around theorizing about hidden thoughts, unconscious desires, and invisible feelings, Ivan saw them as little more than scientific guesswork. To him, psychology wasn't a science. It was storytelling dressed up as research. Ivan wasn't interested in your soul. He was interested in hard, cold, measurable biology. He was a strict, fiercely obsessive physiologist. Did I mention he was Russian? He was also, for a very long time, completely broke. In the early days of his career, Ivan was so financially strained that he literally couch surfed. He slept on tables inside his own laboratory, not as a quirky personality trait, just as a fact of his life. The man was committed. But he was also resourceful. To fund his research, he figured out how to safely harvest and bottle up canine gastric juice. Then he sold it across Europe. It was a highly popular liquid cure for human indigestion. Drop a comment if you want that canine gastric juice recipe. Thankfully, his obsession with plumbing the depths of the dog digestive system eventually paid off. In 1904, Ivan won the prestigious Nobel Prize, but again, not for psychology. He won it for his groundbreaking research into digestion. And it was during that exact highly disciplined research into saliva that he stumbled into a massive flaw in his data, an accident that would change our understanding of human nature forever. So what actually happened in that Russian laboratory? Ivan was conducting a very precise experiment. He wanted to measure exactly how much saliva a dog's mouth produced when given food, down to the absolute microscopic drop. To do this with his mathematical accuracy, he surgically attached tiny transparent collection tubes to the inside of the dog's cheeks. This is called a fistula, a small opening created to allow fluids to be collected and measured. FYI, the dogs, by most accounts, were actually fine with it. They were given food and belly rubs and became quite comfortable with the whole arrangement. Ivan genuinely liked his dogs. He kept record of their names and he cared about their welfare. He was a complicated man. What Ivan was studying was the biological built-in hardwired rules. When you place dry meat powder directly into a hungry dog's tongue, a biological reflex kicks in. The physical presence of the food triggers the salivary glands. It's an unconditioned automatic reaction. Ivan called this an unconditioned stimulus, producing an unconditioned response. The dog doesn't have to think about it. Nature does the work. But here's where it gets interesting. As Ivan and his assistants ran these trials day after day, a frustrating glitch started ruining their data. The dogs started drooling before the food ever touched their mouths. In fact, they started drooling before they even saw the food. Eventually, Ivan realized the dogs were salivating the exact moment they heard the heavy leather boots of the lab assistant clicking down the concrete hallway. Let's leave Ivan and his assistant in the hallway for a moment. The drooling before they were fed was an enormously inconvenient discovery because Ivan was not studying the reflexes to sounds. He was studying digestion. This was like a plumber trying to fix a leaky faucet and accidentally discovering a hidden underground city. The leak was still there, but it was no longer the most interesting thing in the room. From a purely biological standpoint, this is bizarre. Footsteps are just a sound. You cannot eat a footstep. It has zero nutritional value. It has no taste, no smell. Well, hopefully no smell, and no physical connection to hunger. Yet the dog's physical organs were reacting to sound waves in the air exactly the same way they reacted to real physical meat. Their bodies were preparing for food because of shoes. Back to the laboratory. Ivan realized he was looking at a brand new kind of reflex, a psychological reflex, one that wasn't built into biology at birth, but had been learned, written into the nervous system by experience. He called it a conditioned response, and he understood immediately that this was not a quirk specific to those particular dogs. This was a window into how all mammals, including us, actually worked. Being a rigorous scientist and, Russian, Ivan decided to isolate this phenomenon. He stripped away the assistants and replaced them with completely neutral artificial stimuli. And here is a myth we need to expel from school. Ivan almost never used a bell. As a man obsessed with precision, he hated bells. A bell sound echoes, it fades, it changes pitch depending on how hard you shake it. That wasn't nearly accurate enough for his strict standards. A bell was sloppy. Ivan did not do sloppy. Instead, he used mechanical metronomes, electric buzzers, lights, rotating discs, even harmoniums, those old pump organ instruments. Each one was chosen because it produced an absolutely consistent, repeatable, measurable signal every single time. Here is how the core experiment was structured. Ivan would set a mechanical metronome on a table in front of a dog. The dog would sit there, ears perked, completely indifferent. The sound meant absolutely nothing. It triggered no salivation, zero. The salivary tubes recorded nothing. This is what Ivan called the neutral stimulus, something that on its own provokes no response. Ivan would immediately deliver the meat powder every single time after the tick. The metronome was always followed by food. He repeated this pairing, sometimes 50, sometimes 100 times or more across multiple sessions. Then food. Ivan turned on the metronome, let it tick, and withheld the food entirely. The result was astonishing. The dog's mouth instantly began to fill with saliva. The neutral, meaningless ticking of a clock had been stitched so deeply into the dog's physical nervous system that the brain could no longer tell the difference between the signal of the reward and the reality of the reward. The neutral stimulus had become a conditioned stimulus, and the drooling was now a conditioned response. Ivan called this classical conditioning. But Ivan didn't stop there because Ivan had the energy of a man who slept on laboratory tables by choice. He ran a series of additional experiments to map the edges of this discovery, and what he found was even stranger. What happens when you keep playing the metronome but never bring the food? Ivan wanted to know if the conditioned response would simply fade. It did. Over repeated sessions of no food, the salivation decreased and eventually stopped. Ivan called this extinction, the gradual disappearance of a learned response when the conditioned stimulus is repeatedly presented without the original reward. But here is where it gets eerie. He waited a day. He didn't play the metronome. The dog just lived its life for 24 hours. No signal, no food pairing, nothing. Then Ivan played the metronome again. And the salivation came back, fully, with no retraining. He called this spontaneous recovery. And what actually happened inside the dog's nervous system was the original pairing, metronome equals food, had wired a bridge into the brain. That bridge is physical, real. It doesn't disappear. During the extinction, Ivan played the metronome repeatedly without food. The dog learned a second rule on top of the first one. The metronome no longer predicts anything. The dogs stop salivating. But the original bridge was never erased. Think of it like a light switch connected to a lamp. You learn the switch doesn't work anymore, so you stop using it. You've learned the rule, but the wiring is still in the wall. The connection still exists. It's just been overridden. After one day of not hearing the metronome played again. The dog's nervous system said, "Oh, that signal, yeah, I remember that one." The salivation came back. He called this spontaneous recovery. The memory wasn't gone. It had just gone quiet. Which, if you've ever tried to quit a habit you thought you were completely over, might sound uncomfortably familiar. Ivan then discovered something he called stimulus generalization. Once a dog had been conditioned to salivate to a specific metronome tempo, say 60 beats per minute, he would also salivate through less strongly at 70 beats per minute, or 50, or even a completely different ticking sound it had never heard before. The brain wasn't just learning the exact signal, it was learning the category of signal, a pattern, a family of related things. It was building a broad bridge, not just a narrow one. Going in the opposite direction, Ivan also trained dogs to discriminate between signals. He would present an oval shape on a screen, followed by food, and a circle shape on the same screen, but no food. Over time, the dog learned to salivate for the oval and remain calm for the circle. The nervous system was capable of extraordinary fine-tuning. But then Ivan started making the oval more and more circle-like, rounder and rounder, until it was almost indistinguishable. And when the distinction became impossible to make, something extraordinary and disturbing happened. The dogs broke down. They became agitated, anxious, unable to sit still. They bit at the equipment. They whined. Their behavior became erratic and neurotic. Ivan, with a clinical precision that defined him, called this experimental neurosis, the point at which a nervous system, pushed to discriminate between signals it genuinely cannot distinguish, simply collapses under the ambiguity. Ivan, with the clinical precision that defined him, called this experimental neurosis. Ivan, with the clinical precision that defined him, called this experimental neurosis, the point at which a nervous system pushed to discriminate between signals it genuinely cannot distinguish, simply collapses under the ambiguity. And yes, that will mean something to you by the end of this video. Let's take a step away from Ivan's laboratory again. These discoveries taught us something previously unobserved about human nature. They opened the door to understanding how our own habits work, how our fears form, how our cravings are built, and, critically, how they can be dismantled. Now that we understand how it happens, let's understand why. From an evolutionary perspective, this is a massive survival advantage. In the wild, if a creature has to wait until a predator is actively biting their leg off to feel fear, they are dead. But if the brain can learn to pair a neutral signal, like the faint rustling of leaves in the bushes, with the danger of a predator, the creature can run away early. Our brains are designed to constantly scan our environment, find patterns, and link things together. This is called associative learning, and it runs constantly in the background, whether you ask it to or not. If event A consistently happens right before event B, the brain builds a permanent neural bridge between them. It wires your physical biology so that your body can prepare what's coming next. And it does this completely automatically, bypassing your conscious mind entirely. Your brain does this to save time, save energy, and keep you safe. It automates your life behind your back. And because this system is completely automatic, it doesn't filter out whether the connection is actually logical or healthy for you. It doesn't care if the connection makes sense. It just builds the bridge. It builds bridges for Ivan's dogs. It is building bridges inside of you. Now, over 100 years later, we can look at the profound lessons drawn from those cold laboratories of St. Petersburg. Over your entire lifetime, your brain has quietly, invisibly paired completely neutral things with deep physiological and emotional responses. We aren't drooling over meat powder, usually, but we are responding exactly like Ivan's dogs to a conditioned stimulus. The smell of a specific food that takes you back to a kitchen that no longer exists. A song that makes your chest tight before you even remember why. A notification sound that fills you with dread at 9 p.m. on a Sunday. A room that makes you feel 5 years old the second you walk through. The smell of sunscreen taking you back to the beach. These aren't memories. They're reflexes. The bridge was built without your permission. Your nervous system simply processed the pattern. A happens before B and soldered the wire. Ivan proved that a massive portion of our daily existence is just a collection of hidden metronomes. We are all beautifully functioning organisms whose nervous system has been deeply conditioned by its environment. The bridges have already been built. But once you realize those bridges are there, you gain a superpower. You stop reacting to the automation and you start noticing the triggers. You can finally hear the metronome ticking. And remember the dog who broke down when the signals became impossible to distinguish? When the oval became too close to the circle and the nervous system simply collapsed under the ambiguity? First identified as a laboratory finding, it's now called chronic stress. That is what an impossible work or home environment does. That is what happens when your brain is asked to read signals that genuinely cannot be read. The nervous system doesn't calmly give up, it unravels. Which brings us to the ethics at the bottom of the laboratory notes. Ivan's discovery didn't stay in Russia. A researcher named John B. Watson took Ivan's findings and applied them directly to a human infant. He conditioned a 9-month-old baby, referred to in the literature as Little Albert, to fear a white rat by pairing it with a loud, startling sound. Within weeks, Little Albert was afraid not just of the rat, but of white rabbits, white dogs, cotton balls, and Watson's own white hair. Watson was later asked to leave academia entirely for unrelated reasons, which is a whole other episode, but his work confirmed that Ivan's principles apply to us just as cleanly as they apply to any dog in St. Petersburg. Classical conditioning is now the backbone of addiction science, phobia treatment, advertising, product design, political messaging, and a significant portion of the parenting advice given. That jingle you can't get out of your head? Conditioned stimulus. The cravings you get when you open a specific app? Conditioned stimulus. The anxiety you feel walking into a specific building? Conditioned stimulus. The metronome is everywhere. It has always been everywhere. Ivan just gave us the language to hear it. What is the hidden metronome ruling your life right now? What is that one specific trigger? A certain time on the clock? A physical location in your home? A specific person's name appearing on your phone? What is it that instantly flips your brain to autopilot and pulls your strings before you even realize it's happening? Think about it. Thank you for stepping into the laboratory today. So remember to look out for your own mental metronomes, and more importantly, after all this research I've done on him, his obsessions, failures, sleeping on lab tables, he is not Ivan Pavlov anymore. He's Ivan, and Ivan's my guy. We'll see you in the next experiment. If you want to be here for our next historical deep dive and how your brain is being hacked, make sure to hit subscribe and let me know in the comments, what is the ticking metronome in your life?